At first, this was supposed to be the easiest kind of presidential moment. When a tragedy happens, the commander-in-chief shows up. Instantly, that is how it has always been. He says the right things. Everyone gets a little closure. And this is the moment where the president can step forward and reassure the public, bringing some sense of calm after chaos. A few well-chosen words can provide closure, or at least a temporary reprieve from the emotional toll that national tragedies can have. Instead of offering a steady hand, the White House press conference held on Thanksgiving Day, November 28, 2025, unraveled before the cameras. The event, which should have been a moment for President Trump to demonstrate strength in the face of tragedy, quickly became an episode where he lashed out at a reporter. In a tense exchange with CBS News' Nancy Cordes, Trump, unable to stick to the script,
"Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person?"
A moment that was aired live for millions to witness. The PBS NewsHour. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being about explaining what happened. It became about keeping control of the story. And to get why this press conference unraveled, you have to look at what Trump needed it to be. Because moments like this at the White House aren't really about giving people every detail. They're about keeping things from blowing up. You take something ugly and complicated, and you try to squeeze it into a story people can follow. And the story they wanted was pretty simple. What was supposed to be a simple, dignified moment of presidential leadership instead spiraled into an unanticipated spectacle. The timeline for the tragic incident surrounding the shooting of 2 National Guard members near the White House didn't cooperate with the story the Trump administration wanted to tell. And as the facts began to paint a more complicated picture, Trump resorted to attacking the press, trying to suppress a narrative he couldn't control. Somewhere along the way, this press conference stopped being about the incident itself. It became about maintaining control of the narrative. The White House's desired storyline, as always in moments like this, was deceptively simple. It was a vetting failure. The shooting, the story they wanted to tell, would point squarely at the Biden administration for a failure in screening the shooter. Trump, they hoped, would be the one to step in and fix it. But events quickly escalated, and that simple narrative no longer worked. On November 26, 2025, Reuters reported that 2 National Guard members were shot in what was described as a targeted attack near the White House. The shooter, identified as Rahmanullah Lakanwal, an Afghan national, was quickly taken into custody. Law enforcement officials were still working to determine the motive for the attack, Reuters. This was the moment when the Trump administration saw an opportunity. With Thanksgiving just around the corner, it looked like a prime chance for the president to step in and address the situation with a firm hand. They could issue a statement denouncing the attack and use it as an opportunity to tighten immigration policies. By doing so, they could leverage the tragedy to reinforce their tough stance on border control. Following this, the West Virginia National Guard confirmed that Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, 20, died on November 27, 2025, from her wounds. This tragedy compounded the tension around the incident. Instead of the holiday being a time of reflection and calm, it became a moment of crisis for the administration. And because it was Thanksgiving, it was thought of as a chance for the president to speak softly after a tragedy and bring the temperature down. But quite the opposite happened. As the country mourned,
Now says he's pausing all asylum decisions after the shooting near the White House that left 1 National Guard member dead and another in critical condition.
According to reports, all asylum decisions were put on hold, and visas for individuals traveling on Afghan passports were suspended. The move was an immediate response to the attack, and one that served to ratchet up the rhetoric on immigration as it framed the shooting as part of a broader problem tied to Afghan resettlement. This was the exact moment that the press jumped in to question the narrative. A simple policy move, which in theory should have been a straightforward defense of national security, suddenly became the center of a controversy over vetting procedures. Questions started coming in fast, and the tension played out on camera when on November 28, 2025, during a Thanksgiving Day press conference, CBS News' Nancy Cordes pressed Trump on the vetting of Afghan nationals. She specifically asked him why the responsibility for the attack was being placed on the Biden administration when the suspect, Lakanwal, had entered the country in 2021 under Biden's Operation Allies Welcome. Reuters identified him as Rahmanullah Lakanwal, an Afghan national who entered the U.S. in 2021 under Operation Allies Welcome. The timeline was inconvenient for the White House's narrative, but the facts were clear. Lakanwal, an Afghan national, had arrived in the United States as part of the mass evacuation effort in the wake of the fall of Kabul. He had applied for asylum in 2024 and was granted it in April 2025 during the Trump administration. That detail alone gave the White House a perfect out. They could place the blame on the Biden administration using Lakanwal's entry under the previous administration as a hook. But its courts pressed Trump, pointing out the fact that Lakanwal's asylum was approved under Trump's watch, and this is exactly the part that makes the story dangerous. You can still say he entered the country under Biden. That part's true. But you can't just ignore the fact that asylum was granted later under Trump. And that's where this press conference starts to wobble. Because when the story being told doesn't line up with the timeline, reporters do what they're supposed to do. They stop letting it slide, and they ask the obvious question. This moment, captured on video, was a turning point. It shifted the focus away from the substance of the story and placed it squarely on the president's behavior. In that instant, the press conference meant to address a tragic incident and provide closure was derailed. The narrative was no longer about policy or the tragic shooting. It was about Trump's aggressive response to the press, his unwillingness to answer the difficult questions, and his attempts to regain control of the situation. Once the president started attacking the press during a tragedy briefing, it became impossible for the conversation to stay focused on the original issue. The dynamics changed completely. The press, sensing blood in the water, pressed harder, as they always do. And once the president starts attacking the press during a tragedy briefing, people stop listening for facts and start watching his behavior. It's no longer about what happened. It becomes about what he might do next. And the press never stops. It pushes harder because the insult avoids the real question. The real question is the timeline. As the media dug into the details, the contradictions between the White House's messaging and the reality of the timeline became impossible to ignore. News channels like ABC also reported on November 28, 2025 that
Rahmanullah Lakanwal, he came to the U.S. in 2021 after the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from the country, but sources tell us he was granted asylum just this year by the Trump administration.
CBS News went even further on December 1st, 2025, laying out the immigration process and reporting that USCIS approved Lakanwal's asylum application in April 2025, citing U.S. officials. So this isn't one outlet. This is multiple mainstream sources landing on the same key point. And once the public was made aware of these details, the question became unavoidable, which explains why the court's question lands like a brick. Because once the audience hears April 2025, the question becomes unavoidable. If this asylum decision was approved under Trump, then why is the story being told like it's only about Biden? That discrepancy was the anchor that caused the press conference to collapse. What had been an attempt to consolidate power and push forward an administration-approved narrative became an embarrassing spectacle. This wasn't just about a bad press conference. This was a breakdown of the system. The rules that govern such events, where questions are answered, narratives are clarified, and control is maintained, simply weren't followed. Instead of addressing the questions head-on and offering clarity, the White House attempted to shut down the inquiry with personal attacks. The system, which should have operated smoothly, faltered. And that contradiction didn't slide. Reuters described the shooting as a targeted attack and followed the fallout, showing how officials couldn't even agree on a clear motive as the immigration debate heated up. The administration quickly used the shooting to suspend asylum decisions and visa processing a move critics said was broad, rushed, and not really tied to the facts of this case. So, while the legal case moved forward, the messaging started to come apart. And then Thanksgiving made it all even stranger, because the press conference was only part of the day's public-facing footage. Later, Trump participated in a Thanksgiving call with service members, and the official transcript shows him going into a long brag about his golf record. In the transcript published by Reverend Trump says,
I've won 38 club championships, and I don't get to practice much. I won one last year. I won a club championship at a big club, beating a 27-year-old kid.
On its own, that's just Trump being Trump. Doing that on the same day a 20-year-old service member died feels jarring. In a different situation, this might just be a quirky side note. Here, it feels like he's losing focus, and that's dangerous, because people aren't looking for charm or personality. They just want to see someone steady. Meanwhile, real-world consequences weren't waiting around. They kept rolling forward. Associated Press then went on to report that on November 30, 2025, that Trump invited the families of the 2 Guard members to visit the White House, noting Beckstrom's death, and that the other Guard member remained seriously injured. Then in December, the morning became formal and final. Associated Press reported on December 10, 2025, that Beckstrom was laid to rest with military honors at the West Virginia National Cemetery in Grafton. Looking back, this didn't fall apart because of one press conference or one heated moment. It fell apart because the system only works when questions are answered. And when Trump treated a simple timeline question like an insult, that stopped being possible. Once that line was crossed, there wasn't much left to fix. The rules of the game couldn't change without breaking something, and Trump wasn't willing to just answer the question to keep the image intact. So he attacked the reporter instead, and the story shifted. The press moved in. The narrative spun out. Control slipped, and the focus stopped being policy and started being about stability itself. And this wasn't just a meltdown. It was a system failing in plain sight. This is rich and reckless. If you want more stories like this, like the video, subscribe, and tell us what we should cover next.